In the meantime, we got to turn our attention to the state of Texas, the energy crisis there, which is becoming a sort of a series of cascading failures. You got obviously a couple dozen dead, still hundreds of thousands without power. Some of the anecdotal signals of the pain down there, David, people boiling snow, using their propane tanks on their grills to get some drinkable water. Livestock, obviously, dying in the cold. Some crops have been wiped out. And then energy, with a fifth of refining capacity in this country now out. RBOB futures highest since middle of 2019.
Yeah, and they're not now. Natural gas is not going to be leaving the state to some extent for a while. Yeah, Carl, we're watching it closely as we need to. You can see, of course, WTI is now above $61. We've talked about the resurgence in a number of the major energy companies' shares. That's been going on for some time, by the way. An out-of-favor group from last year, certainly since the election, strangely enough, has been up sharply, as have, and this has nothing to do with this story, as has financials, which we can talk about in a bit. But, Leslie, it's a humanitarian crisis right now. They are restoring power, thankfully. There are fewer homes now without power than there were certainly this time yesterday. But we're watching it closely, and they're still enduring some very, very bad weather.
They are. And there's some really interesting second derivative effects that are starting to really play out here. Number one, with the chip makers. There are several large companies, Samsung, NXP, that have had to scale back their production at a time when semis, of course, are already under pressure for supply chain constraints. But they have major factories in Austin, Texas, and they have been asked by the power providers there to basically shut down amid all of this in order to conserve energy. And so I'm sure we will start to see more stories like that take place as they work through all of the various challenges in Texas, Carl.
Yeah. Of course, the debate continues about which method of energy, which fuel source is the true culprit. You do have the governor of Texas, who had suggested that it was, in fact, a signal of the failure of renewables, talk about the limits on nat gas exporting out of the state. Here's what he said.
I have, earlier today, issued an order effective today through February the 21st, requiring those producers that have been shipping to locations outside of Texas to instead sell that natural gas to Texas power generators. That will also increase the power that's going to be produced and sent to homes here in Texas.
If there is some good news, David, it's not just the fact that they're expecting temperatures in the 50s this weekend, but for the first time, really since the middle of Monday, the grid load is climbing, suggesting that they are able to at least restore power to the people who've been without power the longest. Yeah,
and we can only hope that happens as quickly as possible. Carl, I mean, you can't help but note that everything becomes, unfortunately, a political issue, as has this. And I know you've noted it on Twitter as well, in terms of at least renewables being associated with the Democratic Party and obviously the Republicans in Texas sort of going after that. Sometimes you wouldn't expect that to be the case, but unfortunately it is there. So they're fighting that out as well, while they also obviously try to get the lights back on.
Yeah, and, it's going to be interesting. Leslie, the House is expected to pass COVID relief at the end of next week, but infrastructure now, as part of the discussion, is not that far behind. They're throwing out figures like $2 trillion, even $3 trillion on the Dem side, and it'd be curious to see how much gets incorporated late in the game, really, as they start to craft this package. It's been a couple of years we've been talking about it. But to what degree does the grid now become part of that equation?
I think that is a fantastic point. And I was actually talking to a big sustainability investor yesterday about this very topic, this idea that infrastructure spending under this new administration with regard to clean energy will be a really big component of it. And I think, just the timing of this whole thing and taking place in Texas and the focus just on the risk of their power structure down there is something that will be just a huge catalyst to improve infrastructure and improve it in potentially a sustainability way that maybe, if you didn't have that case study, it may not have been as strong of a point, David, that the need for upgrade is dire, and here's why.
Yeah. But first up, Carl, will be, of course, the stimulus bill, or whatever we want to call it, the $1.9 trillion bill working its way through, perhaps. And that's, when it comes to the markets, that's what I hear most about in my conversations. Is it throwing fuel on an already fairly well-raging fire or not? Will it cause inflation? I know that we'll be taking a look at sort of the broader markets in a moment, including the bond market, which can be a telltale sign.
Yeah, man. Commodity prices on the one hand, and then jobless claims still elevated this morning on the other hand.
Shepard Smith here. Thanks for watching CNBC on YouTube.